Have you ever looked in the mirror and felt a stranger staring back at you? For Clara Lewis, this ordinary moment becomes a doorway into a nightmare when her reflection smiles before she does. What begins as an unexplainable incident spirals into a dark journey as Clara discovers a hidden room in an abandoned lake house, sealed away for 26 years, with a mirror that shows two little girls running behind her reflection when no one is there. As Clara uncovers fragments of a forgotten past, a mysterious code, a torn photograph with a lurking shadow, and an elderly man who whispers, "You came back," she's drawn deeper into a web of buried secrets. When she finally comes face to face with a woman who shares her eyes, her chin, even the tiny scar beneath her jawline, Clara must confront the most terrifying question of all. What if everything she knows about herself is a carefully constructed lie? This heart-stopping story of two sisters separated by a twisted conspiracy will leave you questioning what's real and what's merely a reflection. Follow the channel now. Like and comment where you're watching from to unlock more chapters in this haunting tale of lost identity and the unbreakable bonds of family. The rain fell in heavy sheets across the empty highway, cutting through the Vermont countryside, droplets racing down the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. Clara Lewis gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, her exhausted eyes fixed on the blurry yellow lines ahead. 42 years old, with premature streaks of gray in her dark hair, she had the worn look of someone who had spent too many years caring for others and too little time caring for herself. The dashboard clock read 11:42 p.m. Another late-night drive home after a double shift at Burlington Medical Center, where she'd worked as a nurse for 15 years. The monotony of the journey was broken only by the soft murmur of the radio, which had been providing background noise to keep her awake. Breaking news from Silverwood Lake, the announcer's voice suddenly cut through Clara's fatigue-induced trance. During the restoration of an old lakeside property, contractors discovered a room that appears to have been sealed off for decades. Local authorities are... Clara's hands jerked involuntarily. The car swerved, tires skidding on the wet asphalt before she regained control. Her heart pounded against her ribs as if trying to escape. "Silverwood," she whispered, the name hanging in the air like an uninvited ghost. She had never been to Silverwood Lake, had never even heard of it before, at least not that she could remember. Yet the name resonated within her, striking a chord deep inside that vibrated with a frequency both familiar and terrifying. Pulling over to the shoulder, Clara cut the engine and sat in darkness broken only by occasional headlights passing by. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her face. What was happening to her? Why did a simple news report about an old house trigger such a visceral reaction? "It's just exhaustion," she told herself aloud, her voice small in the enclosed space. "Just need sleep." By the time she arrived home, the rain had settled into a gentle patter. Clara's modest two-bedroom house sat dark and silent, waiting for her like it did every night. She flipped on lights as she moved through the rooms, chasing away shadows that seemed more ominous than usual. In the bathroom, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, examining the face that had been hers for as long as she could remember. Hazel eyes, slightly upturned at the corners, a small, almost imperceptible scar beneath her chin from a childhood accident she couldn't quite recall, thin lips that rarely smiled genuinely anymore. As Clara reached for her toothbrush, something shifted in the mirror. For a heartbeat, less than a second, her reflection smiled at her before she did. A cold, knowing smile that Clara herself had not formed. She blinked, and the image normalized. But when she leaned closer, the mirror began to fog despite the room's cool temperature. A thick, unnatural mist crawled across the glass, obscuring her face from view. "What the..." Clara stumbled backward, knocking over a bottle of perfume that shattered against the tile floor. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot, and suddenly her legs gave way. She collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face without explanation or control. Something ancient was stirring, something buried deep inside her that felt like a silent scream from a past she'd never lived, or at least, never remembered living. Halfway across the state in Burlington, in a cluttered art studio on the third floor of a converted warehouse, a woman named Eleanor worked frantically in the dim light of a single lamp. Paint-stained fingers moved across canvas after canvas, each one depicting the same haunting image: a young girl with hazel eyes, crying in front of a cracked mirror. Eleanor hadn't slept in 3 days. Her husband, Dr. Samuel Winters, had pleaded with her to rest, but she couldn't stop. Not when the visions were so clear, so insistent. Not when every closed eye brought the same face. Clara's face, though Eleanor had never met her. "She's coming back," Eleanor whispered to the empty studio, her voice hoarse. "She's remembering." On the walls around her hung dozens of paintings, all variations of the same subject. A woman with Clara's exact features, sometimes as a child, sometimes as an adult, always with the same haunted expression. In the corner of each canvas, barely visible, Eleanor had painted a tiny inscription, 421L, and in the most recent painting, completed just hours ago, Eleanor had added something new, a silhouette of a house reflected in the waters of a lake, Silverwood Lake. The next morning, Clara called in sick for the first time in 7 years. The circles under her eyes testified to a night spent tossing and turning, plagued by dreams of running children, slamming doors, and a lake that seemed to whisper her name with each ripple across its surface. She sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee, staring at the newspaper article she'd printed from an online search. Forgotten room discovered in historic Silverwood Lake house. The grainy image showed an old Victorian home perched on the edge of dark waters, its windows like watchful eyes peering into a past that refused to stay buried. Clara didn't understand the pull she felt, the certainty that something waited for her there. But as she traced the outline of the house with her fingertip, she knew she had no choice. "I need to go," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "I need to see it." In her bedroom mirror, unseen by Clara as she packed a small overnight bag, her reflection watched with eyes that gleamed with anticipation. For a brief moment, it appeared to be a different woman altogether, one who knew exactly what waited at Silverwood Lake. The reflection mouthed words that Clara herself had not spoken. "We're finally going home, Beth." Clara Lewis drove her weathered Toyota along the narrow, winding road that led to Silverwood Lake, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The vehicle's GPS had failed twice during the journey, as if some invisible force was trying to prevent her arrival. The closer she got to her destination, the more her chest tightened with an inexplicable anxiety. The lake appeared first, a vast mirror of dark water surrounded by towering pines that swayed in the autumn breeze. The surface rippled with glimmers of gold and crimson from the changing leaves, but Clara couldn't appreciate the beauty. Each reflection seemed to hide something beneath, something that called to her with voices she couldn't quite hear. "This is ridiculous," she whispered to herself, adjusting the rearview mirror. For a split second, she thought she saw someone sitting in the back seat, a small figure with eyes like her own. But when she whipped around, there was only emptiness. "I'm losing my mind." As she rounded the final curve, the house came into view. It stood tall and imposing against the afternoon sky, its Victorian architecture a testament to another era. News vans lined the gravel driveway, and a small crowd of reporters hovered near yellow police tape that cordoned off the property. The auction sign staked in the front yard had a red "sold" stamp across it, signaling that someone had purchased this house of whispers and secrets. Clara parked at a distance, her legs trembling as she stepped out. The air here felt different, thicker somehow, charged with something she couldn't name. She approached slowly, clutching her nurse's ID as if it might shield her from whatever waited inside. "Excuse me," she said to a uniformed officer at the perimeter. I'm a local nurse. I heard about the discovery and wanted to see if I could be of any help." The lie felt strange on her lips, but the compulsion to enter the house was overwhelming. The officer looked her over with disinterest. Medical examiners already been through. They found no remains, just old toys and some personal effects. Historical societies documenting everything before the new owner takes possession. "May I?" Clara gestured toward the entrance, surprised at her own boldness. He shrugged. "Stay on the marked pathway. Don't touch anything." The moment Clara's foot crossed the threshold, a violent shiver ran through her body. The floorboards creaked beneath her weight, each groan like a whispered greeting. The air inside was thick with dust and something else. Memory, perhaps, or forgotten time. The smell was oddly familiar. Old books, pine sap, and beneath it all a faint trace of lavender that tickled at the edges of her consciousness. A young woman with a clipboard approached. "Are you with the Historical Society?" "Yes." Clara lied again, the falsehood coming easier this time. "I'm particularly interested in the sealed room they found." The woman's eyes lit up. "It's fascinating. Upstairs, third door on the right. They had to break through a wall that had been plastered over. The room looks like it was frozen in time. Toys from the late 90s, children's drawings, even preserved hair samples in an envelope. The police think it might be connected to a cold case. Clara's heart pounded as she ascended the staircase, each step feeling like she was climbing towards something inevitable. The wooden banister felt warm beneath her palm, almost alive. On the wall, faded rectangles showed where family photos once hung, their absence like missing teeth in a smile. The sealed room was smaller than she expected. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, illuminating dancing particles in the air. 2 small beds with faded quilts, a bookshelf with children's titles, a toy chest, closed but not locked, and dominating the far wall, an oval mirror, its ornate frame dulled by years of neglect, partially covered by a yellowed sheet. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, unable to approach the mirror, yet equally unable to leave. Some primal instinct warned her that looking into that glass would change everything, would show her things she wasn't prepared to see. But her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her forward until she stood directly before it. With trembling fingers, she reached for the sheet. It fell away like a surrendering ghost, revealing the reflective surface beneath. At first, she saw only herself, pale, frightened, eyes wide with anticipation. But then the reflection shifted. Behind her appeared 2 little girls, perhaps 8 and 10 years old, running in circles and laughing silently. One of them looked directly at Clara through the mirror, her small face a perfect miniature of Clara's own. Clara spun around, heart racing, but the room behind her was empty. When she turned back, the mirror showed only her reflection once more, but now there were tears streaming down her face, tears she couldn't feel on her actual cheeks. "Miss?" The woman with the clipboard stood in the doorway. "Are you all right?" Clara wiped at her dry face. "Yes, The dust," she managed. "What did the police conclude about this room?" "Not much officially. They filed it as evidence of previously undocumented occupants, possibly related to the family that vanished in the late 90s. The house changed hands several times after that, but no one ever discovered the hidden room until now." As the woman spoke, Clara noticed something on the back of the mirror, an engraving partially obscured by dust. She pretended to steady herself against the wall while surreptitiously running her finger over the marking. GER 421L. The sight of those characters sent electric shocks through her fingertips, up her arm, and into her chest, where they exploded into fragments of memory too brief to grasp. A child's laugh, water splashing, a door slamming, screams in the night. "I think I should go," Clara whispered, suddenly desperate for fresh air. Outside, the afternoon light had softened. As Clara hurried toward her car, she noticed an elderly man watching her from across the street. He stood beside an old pickup truck, his weathered face creased with what might have been recognition. When their eyes met, he visibly paled. She hesitated, then walked toward him. "Excuse me, do I know you?" The man's hands trembled as he removed his cap. "Henry Callahan," he said, his voice rough with age and emotion. "I did carpentry work on this house. Back then." "Back when?" 26 years ago." His eyes never left her face, studying every feature with a mixture of disbelief and something that looked unsettlingly like fear. "Right before they disappeared." "Who disappeared?" Henry's weathered lips parted, formed words that seemed to cost him great effort. "You did, child, you came back." Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. As she staggered backward, the reflection in her car window wasn't her own, but that of a small girl with frightened eyes and a familiar face. A face that had been watching her from mirrors her entire life. "You need to sit down," Henry said, guiding Clara to a weathered bench overlooking the lake. The evening light cast long shadows across the water, turning it into a sheet of burnished copper. Clara's hands wouldn't stop shaking, and the old man's words echoed in her mind like a broken record. "You came back." Henry's pickup truck was parked nearby, its bed filled with woodworking tools covered in sawdust. He looked to be in his 70s, with deep lines etched into his face and hands that bore the scars of decades working with wood. Despite his age, his eyes remained sharp, missing nothing as they assessed Clara with a mixture of wonder and caution. "The Reeves family owned this house back in '98, Henry began, his voice low as if afraid of being overheard by the reporters still milling around the property. "Thomas and Eleanor Reeves. Strange couple, kept to themselves mostly. Had 2 adopted daughters, Annie and Beth." Clara flinched at the name Beth, though she couldn't explain why. A chill ran down her spine despite the mild autumn air. "The girls were about 8 and 10 when they moved in. Henry continued. Sweet little things, always playing by the lake. I was hired to do some renovations, build bookshelves, fix the porch railing, that sort of thing. He paused, swallowing hard. That's when the mirror arrived. The oval mirror upstairs? Clara asked, her mouth suddenly dry. Henry nodded, his weathered hand absently rubbing at his knee. Delivered special from somewhere back east. Thomas insisted on installing it himself, wouldn't let me near it. The very next day he had me seal off that room, told me the girls were going to boarding school and they'd reopen it when they returned. His eyes clouded with guilt. I should have known something wasn't right. The way those girls looked at me that last day, like they were silently begging for help. A flock of geese flew overhead, their formation a perfect V against the darkening sky. Clara watched them go, wondering what it would be like to fly away from this place, from the weight of revelations she didn't understand. What happened to them? She finally asked. Nobody knows for sure. The Reeves told neighbors the girls went to boarding school, but a few weeks later, the whole family vanished, left everything behind. Clothes in closets, food in the refrigerator, cars in the garage. Police investigation went nowhere. No records of any boarding school admission, no trace of where they might have gone. Henry's voice dropped even lower. Some folks said they heard screaming from the house that final night, but no one called it in. People mind their business around here. Clara stared at her reflection in the still water of the lake, half expecting it to move independently again, to show her something hidden beneath the surface of her own memory. And the room was sealed all this time? Plastered over, painted, wallpapered. The house changed hands 3 times since then, but somehow that room remained untouched, like a secret the house itself was keeping. Henry turned to face her directly. But you're Beth, aren't you? You have her face. Older now, but unmistakable. My name is Clara Lewis, she insisted, though the conviction in her voice wavered. I was raised in an orphanage in Rochester. I've never been to Silverwood Lake before yesterday. Henry's expression didn't change. Maybe you don't remember, but this place remembers you. That night, Clara checked into the only motel in the small town of Silverwood, a modest establishment with dated decor and thin walls that couldn't keep out the sound of passing trucks on the nearby highway. She lay awake for hours, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, trying to convince herself that everything Henry told her was a coincidence, that her reaction to the house and the mirror was nothing more than an overactive imagination fueled by exhaustion. But when she finally drifted into fitful sleep, her dreams betrayed her. 2 young girls ran along the lake shore, their laughter carried by the wind. They splashed in the shallows, chased fireflies as dusk settled, and whispered secrets beneath a weeping willow. And they called to her, not as Clara, but as Beth. She awoke with a start at 3:17 a.m., drenched in sweat despite the room's chill. The dream had felt more like a memory than a fabrication of her subconscious, vivid, tactile, infused with emotions that lingered even in wakefulness. She could still feel the cool lake water on her skin, still smell the pine trees and marshmallows roasting over a campfire. Meanwhile, in Burlington, Eleanor's condition had deteriorated rapidly. Dr. Samuel Winters paced outside his wife's studio, listening to the sounds of canvases being slashed, paint jars shattering against walls. When the chaos finally subsided, he cautiously opened the door to find Eleanor huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth, surrounded by the destruction of her own artwork. She's coming back, Eleanor whispered, over and over, her eyes unfocused. She's remembering. Who, love? Samuel knelt beside her, careful not to touch her during these episodes. Who's coming back? Eleanor's head snapped up, her gaze suddenly clear and penetrating. Beth, my sister, and she'll ruin everything. Samuel helped Eleanor to their bed, administered the sedative prescribed by her psychiatrist, and waited until her breathing evened out in sleep. Only then did he return to the studio, picking his way through broken glass and torn canvas to retrieve her journal from beneath a fallen easel. He'd never invaded his wife's privacy before, but her deteriorating mental state left him little choice. The entries started normally enough, notes about art projects, grocery lists, reminders about bills, but about halfway through the handwriting changed, becoming more frantic. The pages filled with the same phrases repeated. 26 years, espelho, lago, vozes. Samuel frowned at the Portuguese word for mirror, a language Eleanor had never studied. The final pages contained a countdown. 3 days left, 2 days left, 1 day left. She's here. Today's page held a single sentence. The mirror has found her. Back in Silverwood, morning brought no clarity to Clara. She returned to the lake house drawn by an invisible thread she couldn't break. The property was quieter today. Most reporters had moved on to fresher stories, leaving only a single police officer guarding the site. Clara waited until he stepped away for a cigarette break before slipping inside. The house felt different in the morning light, less threatening but somehow more alive, as if it had been waiting for her return. She climbed the stairs directly to the sealed room, her footsteps leaving prints in the dust that had settled overnight. The mirror waited, its oval shape like an eye watching her approach. Clara stood before it again, bracing herself for whatever visions it might reveal. But this time it showed only her reflection, tired, confused, searching for answers in her own eyes. As she turned to leave, something caught her attention, a small glint between the mirror and the wall. Clara carefully moved the heavy frame forward, revealing what appeared to be a photograph wedged into the narrow space behind. Her fingers trembled as she extracted it. The photograph was torn in half, its edges yellowed with age. It showed two little girls holding hands, their faces bright with innocent joy. Clara recognized herself in one of them, or rather, recognized the child who might have been Beth. But what made her blood run cold was the partial image captured at the edge of the torn photo. A dark shadow looming behind the girls, its form distorted but unmistakably human. As Clara stared at the image, Henry's truck pulled into the driveway below. She hurried downstairs, eager to show him her discovery, but the old man's driveway remained empty. By nightfall, word spread through the small town. Henry Callahan had disappeared, leaving nothing behind but an empty house and a collection of unfinished wooden toys on his workbench. The Rochester Children's Home stood like a fortress against the slate-gray sky, its red brick facade darkened by decades of rain and neglect. Clara had avoided this place for 20 years, ever since she'd aged out of the system at 18. Yet here she was, climbing the worn stone steps that had featured in countless nightmares. The torn photograph burned in her pocket like a hot coal, a tangible link to a past she couldn't remember but could no longer deny. The interior smelled exactly as she remembered, industrial disinfectant barely masking the underlying sense of institutional cooking, and too many children packed into too little space. The linoleum floors, polished to a dull shine, squeaked beneath her boots as she made her way to the administrative office. Each step echoed down the corridor, mixing with distant sounds of children's voices, some laughing, others crying, creating a dissonant symphony that made Clara's skin crawl. Mrs. Winters, the director, hadn't changed much, still rail-thin with silver hair pulled into a severe bun, reading glasses perched on the end of her nose like suspicious sentries. She looked up from her computer as Clara entered, recognition dawning slowly in her pale blue eyes. "Clara Lewis," she said, her voice carrying the same clipped efficiency Clara remembered. "It's been quite some time." Clara forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. 20 years, give or take. "You've done well for yourself, I understand. A nurse at Burlington Medical." Mrs. Winters removed her glasses, letting them hang from a beaded chain around her neck. "What brings you back here after all this time?" Clara had rehearsed this conversation during the 3-hour drive from Silverwood, but now that the moment had arrived, her carefully prepared explanation evaporated. Instead, she placed the torn photograph on the desk between them. "I need to see my file." Mrs. Winters glanced at the photo, her expression revealing nothing. "You know our policy on confidential records, Clara. I also know that legally, I'm entitled to access my own file." Clara leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Please, Mrs. Winters. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important." The director studied Clara's face for a long moment, then sighed. "Wait here." Left alone, Clara examined the office, noting how little had changed since her last visit. The same inspirational posters hung on the walls, their platitudes about perseverance and achievement ringing hollow in a place where children's futures were determined by paperwork and bureaucracy. A bulletin board displayed photos of success stories, former residents who had overcome their circumstances. Clara's own graduation photo from nursing school was still there, faded but prominently placed, a beacon of hope for current residents. Mrs. Winters returned carrying a thin manila folder, her lips pressed into a tight line. "This is all we have on you," she said, placing it on the desk. "As you know, you came to us as a Jane Doe, found wandering along Route 17 with no identification, no memory of your name or where you came from." Clara nodded. remembering the story she'd been told countless times. She'd been approximately 12 years old when found, suffering from exposure and dehydration. When no one claimed her, she became a ward of the state, named Clara by the intake nurse who processed her case. She opened the folder with trembling fingers, skimming through pages of psychological evaluations, school records, medical reports, the clinical documentation of her childhood. Nothing she hadn't seen before. "There's nothing here about where I came from before," she said, frustration edging her voice. Mrs. Winters hesitated, a flicker of something, fear, crossing her features. "What exactly are you looking for, Clara?" Clara withdrew the small piece of paper she'd found behind the mirror, smoothing it flat on the desk. "This number, 421L, does it mean anything to you?" The change in Mrs. Winters was immediate and dramatic. The color drained from her face and she gripped the edge of the desk as if to steady herself. "Where did you get that?" "So you do recognize it?" Clara pressed, her heart pounding. After a moment's hesitation, Mrs. Winters crossed to a filing cabinet in the corner, unlocking it with a key she wore around her neck. From the bottom drawer, she extracted a different folder, this one older, its edges frayed, labeled simply 421L. "This was classified," she said quietly, placing it before Clara. "The Lake sisters case, one of our most disturbing unsolved mysteries." Clara opened the file with reverent care, as if handling something explosive. Inside was a police report dated October 15, 1998, detailing the discovery of a young girl, approximately 12 years old, wandering along Route 17 near Rochester. The girl could not or would not provide her name or any details about her past. Physical examination revealed signs of prolonged confinement and possible psychological trauma. Attached was a medical report with a diagnosis that made Clara's blood run cold. Subject exhibits classic symptoms of amnesia dissociativa, likely trauma-induced. Recommends specialized psychiatric care. And at the bottom of the page, a handwritten note. "Beth Lewis, transferred without authorization. Investigation pending." "Beth Lewis," Clara whispered, the name both foreign and achingly familiar on her tongue. "We never knew what happened to the other sister," Mrs. Winters said softly. "The police suspected they'd been separated deliberately." Clara stared at the woman, realization dawning. "You knew. All these years you knew I was one of the Lake sisters, and you never told me?" Mrs. Winters looked away, shame evident in her posture. "There were instructions from people with authority. The case was sealed, the records buried. We were told it was for your protection." "Protection from what?" Clara demanded, her voice rising. "From whom?" Before Mrs. Winters could answer, Clara's phone vibrated with an incoming text. It was from an unknown number. "Stop looking. Some reflections should stay buried." Miles away in Burlington, Eleanor stood in the White Pine Gallery, her first public appearance in weeks. The exhibition of her work had drawn a modest crowd. Local art enthusiasts, a few critics, curious passers-by. She moved mechanically through the space, accepting congratulations with practiced smiles that never reached her eyes, which constantly scanned the room as if searching for something, or someone. Samuel watched his wife from across the gallery, worry etched into his features. The medication had stabilized her somewhat, but there remained a brittle quality to her composure, like glass ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. His attention was drawn to a customer engaged in conversation with the gallery owner, a woman with dark hair cut in a practical bob, her posture suggesting both authority and unease. The woman purchased one of Eleanor's paintings, the portrait of a young girl standing before a mirror, her reflection showing not herself but another child reaching out from within the glass. Samuel watched as the gallery owner processed the transaction, handing over a receipt for the woman to sign. "Thank you, Ms. Lewis," the owner said, reading from the credit card. "Clara Lewis." Eleanor's head snapped up at the name, her eyes locking onto the woman across the room. For an instant, recognition flashed between them, a current of electricity connecting 2 points of a circuit long broken. Then Clara was gone, slipping out the door with the wrapped painting under her arm. Samuel approached his wife, finding her frozen in place, white as a sheet. "Eleanor, what is it?" "She bought my painting," Eleanor whispered, clutching his arm with desperate strength. "Beth bought my painting." "Eleanor, you're confused. That woman's name was Clara." "No." Eleanor's eyes blazed with terrible clarity. "It's Beth, my sister. She found us." She pulled away from him, moving toward the gallery's computer where customer information was stored. "I need to know where she lives." On the receipt displayed on the screen, Clara had listed her address, a cabin rental on the shores of Silverwood Lake. As darkness fell over Vermont, the radio in Clara's car crackled with static as she drove back toward the lake, the orphanage file on the seat beside her. Through the interference came fragments of a news report. Investigation into the disappearance of local carpenter Henry Callahan continues. Police are now looking into possible connections to the unsolved case of the missing family at Silverwood Lake 26 years ago. Clara switched off the radio, unable to bear the coincidences piling up around her. The road ahead twisted through dense forest, her headlights cutting a narrow path through the darkness. In her rearview mirror, another set of headlights appeared, maintaining a constant distance behind her. She was being followed. Dawn broke over Silverwood Lake in a spectacular display of crimson and gold, the first light of day igniting the autumn foliage that surrounded the water. Dew glistened on the tall grass, and a gentle mist hovered above the lake's surface, giving the entire scene an ethereal quality. Clara stood on the shore, the torn photograph clutched in her hand, her eyes fixed on the Victorian house that loomed on the opposite bank. She hadn't slept. After noticing the car following her last night, she'd taken a series of random turns down country roads until the headlights eventually disappeared from her rearview mirror. Instead of returning to her motel, she'd parked near a public dock and spent the night in her car, jumping at every sound, watching the darkness for signs of pursuit. Now, in the relative safety of daylight, Clara studied the photograph again. Two little girls with matching braids and gap-toothed smiles, their small hands intertwined as if afraid to let go. Behind them, the partial silhouette that had first appeared menacing now seemed protective in the morning light. A parent, perhaps, watching over them. But if that were true, how had they ended up separated, one with no memory of the other? The sound of tires on gravel pulled Clara from her thoughts. A sleek black sedan approached slowly, parking about 50 yards away. Clara tensed, ready to run if necessary, but something about the driver's cautious movements kept her rooted to the spot. A woman emerged from the car, slender, with auburn hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, wearing a paint-stained jacket over jeans. She stood beside her vehicle for a long moment, staring at Clara across the distance that separated them. Even from afar, there was something hauntingly familiar about her face, her posture, the way she held her head slightly tilted to one side. Time seemed to stop as they regarded each other. The birds fell silent, the wind died down, even the gentle lapping of waves against the shore seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Clara felt a pressure building in her chest. Not pain exactly, but a profound ache, like a muscle long unused suddenly called into action. Slowly, the woman began walking toward her, each step deliberate, her eyes never leaving Clara's face. As she drew nearer, Clara could see that she was trembling, her complexion ashen despite the morning chill that should have brought color to her cheeks. When only 10 feet separated them, they both stopped, frozen in a tableau of recognition and disbelief. Now Clara could see what had been invisible at a distance. The woman had the same hazel eyes as her own, the same arch to her eyebrows, the same small cleft in her chin. And there, just visible beneath her jawline, was a tiny scar identical to the one Clara had carried her entire life. "Annie," Clara whispered, the name rising from some buried place inside her. The woman flinched as if struck. "I go by Eleanor now," she said, her voice so similar to Clara's that it was like hearing her own words spoken back to her. "And you're Beth." "Clara," she corrected automatically, though the name suddenly felt borrowed, like clothing that didn't quite fit. "Clara Lewis." A sad smile touched Eleanor's lips. "They kept your last name at least. I became Eleanor Winters when—" She trailed off, her gaze dropping to something she held clutched in her right hand. Clara followed her look and gasped. Eleanor was holding a small wooden box, its lid inlaid with mother-of-pearl in the shape of a crescent moon. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened it, revealing dozens of tiny glass fragments, each no larger than a fingernail. "Pieces of the mirror," Eleanor said softly. "I've carried them with me since that night. I couldn't leave them behind." "What night?" Clara asked, her mouth suddenly dry. "The night they separated us. The night he broke the mirror and said we could never be whole again." Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I hear them sometimes. Voices in the glass. Your voice mostly, calling from far away. A chill ran down Clara's spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. I don't remember any of this. Of course you don't. That was the point. Eleanor took another step forward. You were always the strong one, Beth. You fought back, questioned everything, so they made sure you forgot. Who did? Who separated us? Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a desperate plea for answers. Instead of replying, Eleanor turned toward the house, her expression hardening. We should go inside. It's where it happened, where it all began. They walked side by side toward the Victorian, two women with the same stride, the same posture, connected by blood and severed by secrets. The yellow police tape still cordoned off the property, but in the early morning hours there was no one around to stop them from ducking underneath it. The house seemed to welcome them, the front door swinging open at Eleanor's touch, as if it had been waiting for their return. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight that streamed through dirty windows. Their footsteps echoed on hardwood floors as they made their way upstairs to the sealed room. The oval mirror still dominated the far wall, its surface reflecting their approach. Clara felt a magnetic pull toward it, while Eleanor hung back, clutching her box of fragments. I'm afraid to look, Eleanor admitted, her voice small like a child's. Afraid of what it might show us. Clara reached for her sister's hand, the first time they had touched in 26 years. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, a current of recognition so powerful that they gasped in unison. And in that moment of connection, the mirror's surface began to ripple like disturbed water. Together they approached the glass, their joined hands extended toward it. When their fingertips touched the cool surface, the world around them seemed to dissolve, replaced by a cascade of images that played across the mirror like a film. A man shouting, his face contorted with rage, looming over two frightened girls huddled in a corner. A woman crying, pleading, being dragged away by unseen hands. The same man closing a door, turning a key in the lock, his voice cold. You'll never leave this room until you forget who you are. The mirror cracked with a sound like a gunshot, a jagged line splitting their reflection in two. Clara stumbled backward, pulling Eleanor with her. They collapsed onto the dusty floor, gasping for breath, the shared vision still burning in their minds. Thomas, Eleanor whispered, naming the man in their vision. Not our father, not our real father. Who was he? Clara asked, still reeling from the flood of images. The man who took us, who kept us here. Eleanor's voice hardened. Who separated us when he realized he couldn't break both of us. Outside, the sun had fully risen, bathing the lake in golden light. But inside the sealed room, shadows seemed to gather in the corners, darkness pooling like spilled ink. The mirror continued to crack, hairline fractures spreading outward from the center like a web. It's releasing what was trapped inside, Eleanor murmured, watching the spreading cracks with a mixture of terror and fascination. All the memories, all the pain, everything they tried to bury. Clara stood on shaky legs, pulling Eleanor up beside her. We need to know the whole truth about our real parents, about what happened to us. As they turned to leave, Clara caught a glimpse of their reflection in the fracturing mirror, not as they were now, but as children, hands clasped, faces determined, and behind them, a shadow that was neither protective nor threatening, but watchful, waiting. The shadow had a name, Eleanor realized, and it had been searching for them for 26 years. Rain hammered against the Victorian's roof as Clara and Eleanor moved cautiously through the house, searching for anything that might explain their fragmented past. The storm had rolled in suddenly from the north, dark clouds swallowing the morning sun, as if nature itself wanted to keep secrets hidden in shadow. I don't understand why I can't remember anything, Clara said, running her fingers along the wallpaper in the upstairs hallway. The pattern, faded roses on a cream background, triggered no recognition, no flash of memory. If we lived here together, why is it all blank for me? Eleanor paused at a window, watching raindrops race down the glass. After they separated us, they used the mirror on you differently. On me, it was about remembering the right version of events. For you, it was about forgetting everything. A floorboard creaked beneath Clara's weight, the sound unexpectedly loud in the quiet house. She froze, then pressed her foot down again, deliberately. The board moved slightly, revealing a gap beneath. Eleanor, look at this. Together they knelt, prying up the loose floorboard. Beneath it was a small space, and within that space, a leather-bound journal. its cover cracked with age and discolored with water damage. Clara lifted it out with trembling hands, the weight of it somehow ominous. "We should go downstairs," Eleanor whispered, glancing nervously at the shadows that seemed to gather in the corners of the hallway. "I don't like being up here when it storms." They retreated to the kitchen, a large room with outdated appliances and a farmhouse sink stained with rust. Rain lashed against the windows, turning the view of the lake into a blurred watercolor. Clara placed the journal on the wooden table between them, both sisters staring at it as if it might suddenly spring to life. "Open it," Eleanor finally said, her voice barely audible above the storm. The pages were brittle, threatening to crumble at Clara's touch. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical, lines of text so perfectly spaced they might have been typed. The first entry was dated September 3rd, 1998. "The girls arrived today, younger than I expected. Pure, though. Untainted. The mirror accepts them." Clara and Eleanor exchanged a look of confusion before continuing. September 10th, 1998. "Annie shows resistance. Beth follows her lead. They must be separated during the cleansing." September 17th, 1998. "The girls need to be pure. The mirror will liberate them from the lies of the world." Page after page documented their captivity, each entry more disturbing than the last. The writer, presumably Thomas Reeves, described subjecting them to hours in front of the oval mirror, forcing them to recite phrases, punishing them when they resisted. But between these clinical observations were rambling passages about purification, about voices from the glass, about a world beyond reflections. "He was insane," Clara whispered, her stomach churning. "This isn't about adoption or kidnapping. This was some kind of ritual." Eleanor nodded, her face ashen. "I've had nightmares about standing in front of that mirror for years. In the dreams there's someone on the other side, watching, waiting. I always thought it was just trauma manifesting, but what if—" She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. Between the journal's pages, Clara found photographs, Polaroids of two young girls sitting cross-legged in front of the oval mirror, their expressions blank. In some images, a man's hand could be seen at the edge of the frame, holding something that reflected light, a shard of glass perhaps, or a small knife. But more surprising were the older photographs mixed in with these disturbing images, pictures of the same girls with different adults in different settings. A birthday party with balloons, a Christmas morning with wrapped presents, a summer day at a public pool. Clara turned over one such photo and found a handwritten note. "For our daughters, Annie and Beth. Love eternal. Evelyn and Thomas Lewis." Lewis, Clara echoed, the surname she'd carried her entire life without knowing its origin. "These must be our real parents." Eleanor took the photo, studying it intently. "I have fragments of memories. A woman's perfume, a man's laugh, but nothing concrete. It's like trying to hold water in my hands." As they continued through the journal, the entries became increasingly erratic, the handwriting deteriorating into jagged scrawls that sometimes tore through the paper. October 15, 1998. "The fire was necessary. Purification by flame. The mirror demanded sacrifice." Clara looked up sharply. "Fire? You don't think—" "Our real parents," Eleanor whispered, horror dawning on her face. "What if they didn't just take us? What if they—" The implications hung in the air between them, too terrible to voice aloud. Outside, lightning split the sky, thunder following almost immediately with a crack that shook the house to its foundations. "We need to go deeper," Clara said, closing the journal with a decisive snap. "If there's one hidden space, there might be others." They moved methodically through the house, tapping walls, testing floorboards, searching for any sign of concealment. In the living room, Clara noticed an irregularity in the baseboard, a small section that didn't quite match the rest. When she pressed it, there was a hollow sound. "Help me with this," she called to Eleanor, who rushed to her side. Together they pried away the baseboard, revealing a narrow opening. Clara produced her phone, activating its flashlight to illuminate what lay beyond. A steep staircase descending into darkness. "A hidden basement?" Eleanor's voice quavered. Clara nodded grimly. "Let's find out what else they were hiding." The stairs creaked ominously as they made their descent, the air growing colder and damper with each step. The beam of Clara's flashlight revealed a space about 20 feet square, its floor covered with several inches of murky water from years of flooding. The walls were lined with shelves holding mason jars filled with unidentifiable objects, suspended in cloudy liquid. "What is this place?" Eleanor whispered, staying close to Clara, their shoulders touching for reassurance. Clara swept her light across the room, the beam catching on something metal in the corner. A large trunk, partially submerged in the standing water. They waded toward it, the cold water soaking through their shoes and pants. The trunk was secured with a heavy padlock, but years of water damage had rusted the mechanism. Clara found a piece of broken pipe nearby, and with several forceful strikes, the lock gave way. Inside the trunk were more journals, water-damaged but still legible, along with newspaper clippings about missing children, maps with locations circled in red, and dozens of photographs of other children, all around the same age as Annie and Beth had been. This wasn't just about us, Eleanor realized, horror evident in her voice. We weren't the first. A sudden noise from upstairs, the unmistakable sound of the front door opening, sent them both into alert silence. Footsteps moved across the floor above them, deliberate and heavy. Clara switched off her flashlight, plunging them into darkness. The only light came from the narrow opening at the top of the hidden staircase, a rectangle of gray that offered no comfort. They stood frozen in the cold water, hardly daring to breathe, as the footsteps moved from room to room, searching. "Police department?" a voice called out. "Anyone here?" Clara and Eleanor exchanged a look in the darkness, relief washing over them. But as they prepared to call out, to announce their presence, a second pair of footsteps joined the first. Lighter, quicker. "Any sign of them?" a second voice asked, and this one sent ice through Clara's veins. It was familiar in a way she couldn't place, triggering a visceral fear response that made her grab Eleanor's arm in warning. "Not yet," the first voice replied, "but they've been here. Recently." Clara pulled Eleanor deeper into the shadows, an instinctive move to protect them both from whatever, or whoever, was searching for them above. As they huddled in the darkness, something brushed against Clara's leg in the water, something that wasn't debris or rubbish. Slowly, carefully, she reached down and felt the unmistakable texture of clothing, of fabric covering something solid, something human. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as her fingers traced the contours of what could only be a body submerged in the murky basement water. She stifled a gasp, pulling Eleanor closer to whisper directly into her ear. "There's someone in the water," she breathed, her voice barely audible even in the absolute stillness of their hiding place. Eleanor's body went rigid beside her. Above them, the footsteps continued their methodical search of the house, moving from room to room with deliberate purpose. They had minutes at most before the hidden basement was discovered. With trembling hands, Clara reactivated her phone's flashlight, keeping the beam pointed downward to minimize the chance of detection from above. The light revealed the pale, bloated face of Henry Callahan, the elderly carpenter, his unseeing eyes fixed on the ceiling above. Around his neck, partially obscured by his waterlogged shirt collar, was a thin silver chain. "Henry," Clara whispered, grief and horror mingling in her chest. The man who had recognized her, who might have had answers, was now beyond questioning. Eleanor knelt in the water beside the body, seemingly oblivious to the cold seeping through her clothes. She gently lifted the silver chain from around Henry's neck, revealing a tarnished medallion in the shape of a crescent moon, identical to the inlay on the box of mirror fragments she carried. "He was trying to protect us," Eleanor said softly, examining the medallion. "All these years." The sound of a door slamming upstairs startled them both. The footsteps had moved to the second floor now, directly above the hidden basement. "We need to get out of here," Clara urged, scanning the space for another exit. The only way out appeared to be the stairs they had descended. Eleanor pried open the medallion with careful fingers, revealing that it was actually a locket containing a small, folded piece of paper. She extracted it, unfolding the delicate sheet to reveal a message written in a shaky hand. "In the garden shed. The truth awaits." A sudden creaking from above froze them in place. Someone was standing directly over the hidden door. "What was that?" the second voice asked, and again Clara felt that disturbing jolt of familiarity. "Just the old house settling," the first voice replied. "Let's check upstairs again." As the footsteps moved away, Clara and Eleanor shared a look of silent communication, a connection that transcended their years apart. They needed to move now. With one last glance at Henry's body, a silent promise to seek justice for whatever had befallen him, they waded to the stairs and began their cautious ascent. Each step threatened to creak and give away their position. Clara led the way, testing each board with her weight before committing to the step. At the top, she paused to listen. The footsteps were now in a distant part of the house. With painful slowness, she pushed open the hidden door and peered into the living room. Finding it empty, she motioned for Eleanor to follow. They crept through the house like shadows, keeping low, avoiding the windows where lightning still flashed intermittently. The storm had intensified, rain beating against the house in angry sheets, providing cover for their movements but also making it impossible to determine if additional searchers waited outside. The back door offered their best chance, a straight shot across the muddy yard to the tree line, where they could circle around to find the garden shed mentioned in Henry's note. Clara eased it open, wincing at the slight squeak of the hinges. The rain immediately assaulted them, cold and merciless. "Ready?" she mouthed to Eleanor, who nodded, clutching the medallion and her box of mirror fragments. They burst into the storm, instantly soaked to the skin, mud sucking at their shoes as they ran. Behind them, a shout indicated they'd been spotted, followed by the slam of the back door as their pursuers gave chase. The tree line seemed impossibly distant, the space between offering no cover. Clara grabbed Eleanor's hand, pulling her along, both women slipping and stumbling on the saturated ground. A flashlight beam cut through the rain behind them, sweeping back and forth in search of its quarry. They reached the trees just as a gunshot cracked through the air, the bullet splintering bark inches from Clara's head. They dove deeper into the woods, using the darkness and dense undergrowth for protection. "This way," Eleanor gasped, tugging Clara to the right. The shed should be near the old gardener's cottage. They moved as quickly as the conditions allowed, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. The rain began to slacken, the worst of the storm passing, which meant less noise to cover their escape. The garden shed appeared suddenly through the trees, a small, dilapidated structure with a sagging roof and weathered wooden walls. Its door hung partially open, creaking gently in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old fertilizer. A workbench lined one wall, scattered with rusted tools and crumbling seed packets. In the center of the room, incongruously, sat a single wooden chair, and on it, a sealed envelope yellowed with age. Clara reached for it with shaking hands, but Eleanor caught her wrist. "Wait," she said, her voice strained. "Before we open that, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've remembered." Clara saw the anguish in her sister's eyes, the guilt that shadowed her face. "What is it?" Eleanor sank to the floor, her sodden clothes leaving a puddle around her. I think I'm the reason our real parents died." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy as lead. Clara knelt before her sister, taking her cold hands. "What do you mean?" Tears mixed with rainwater on Eleanor's cheeks. "I've been having these flashes, memories breaking through. I was the one who told Thomas about our parents. I was the one who—" She choked on the words. "I believed the lies he told us, that our real parents were evil, that they would hurt us. And I helped him." The revelation struck Clara like a physical blow. "Helped him how?" "I told him where to find them," Eleanor whispered, her voice hollow with self-loathing. "I gave him their schedule, their routines. I thought I was protecting us. I was just a child, but I should have known. I should have." Clara fought against the surge of anger and betrayal that threatened to overwhelm her. This woman, this stranger who was also her sister, had played a role in destroying their family, in setting them on this broken path. Part of her wanted to lash out, to scream, to demand how Eleanor could have done such a thing. Instead, she looked into her sister's eyes and saw the wounded child beneath the woman's exterior, the little girl who had been manipulated, who had spent 26 years carrying a guilt she couldn't fully understand. Outside, the sounds of searchers moved closer. They had minutes at most. Clara glanced at the oval mirror fragment in Eleanor's open box, catching a glimpse of their reflection, not as they were now, but as children, huddled together against an unseen threat. In that moment, she understood that forgiveness wasn't just a gift to Eleanor. It was the only way to free them both from the past's clutches. "You were just a child," Clara said, her voice breaking. "So was I. We were victims, Eleanor. Both of us." She pulled her sister into an embrace, feeling Eleanor's body shake with silent sobs. "We can't change what happened, but we can face what comes next together." Eleanor clung to her, 26 years of separation dissolving in that moment of connection. When they finally parted, both women had a new resolve in their eyes. Clara reached for the envelope on the chair. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter written in the same shaky handwriting as the note in the locket. "Dear girls," it began, "if you're reading this, then I've failed to protect you as I promised your mother I would. The mirror was never the source of power they claimed. It was only a tool, a vessel for their madness. The real prison was never the glass, but the memories they planted within you. The truth is simpler and more terrible than you can imagine. Look to the east shore of the lake at dawn. What was taken can be restored. What was broken can be mended. I'm sorry I couldn't save you both. Henry." As they finished reading, the door of the shed burst open. Silhouetted against the fading storm stood a police officer, his gun drawn, and beside him, a familiar figure that made both women freeze in shock. Dr. Samuel Winters, Eleanor's husband, stepped into the shed, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I've been looking everywhere for you, Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle but with an undercurrent that raised the hairs on Clara's neck. "It's time to come home." The morning after the storm dawned clear and cold, the sky a perfect, painful blue that seemed to mock the chaos of the previous night. Clara stood alone at the edge of the lake, watching the sun's first rays transform the water's surface into a sheet of hammered gold. Her clothes were still damp, her body exhausted, but her mind was startlingly clear. Last night's confrontation in the garden she'd played on an endless loop in her memory. Samuel's appearance had triggered something in Eleanor, a withdrawal, a submission that happened so quickly it was as if someone had flipped a switch inside her. Clara had watched in horror as her newly found sister's eyes glazed over. Her spine straightened and her voice took on a flat, emotionless quality. "Of course, Samuel," Eleanor had said, stepping toward him with the docility of a trained animal. "I'm sorry for worrying you." The police officer, whom Samuel introduced as Detective Morrison, had holstered his weapon, seemingly satisfied that the situation was under control. He'd asked a few cursory questions about their presence at the house, accepted Samuel's explanation that his mentally unstable wife had gone off her medication, and left them with a warning about trespassing on property under police investigation. Samuel had been solicitous, wrapping a jacket around Eleanor's shoulders, speaking to her in soothing tones. To anyone watching, he appeared every inch the concerned husband managing his troubled wife. But Clara had seen the empty look in Eleanor's eyes, the subtle tremor in her hands, the way she clutched the box of mirror fragments with white-knuckled intensity, even as she obeyed Samuel's gentle direction. Something was deeply wrong, and Clara had been powerless to intervene without endangering them both. So she'd watched as Samuel led Eleanor away, promising to follow up with Clara once his wife was stabilized. Now, standing by the lake with the rising sun warming her back, Clara knew she had hours at most before Samuel realized she was a threat to whatever control he exerted over Eleanor. Henry's letter had mentioned the east shore at dawn, and here she was searching for something, anything that might lead her to the truth. The lake house loomed behind her, abandoned once more now that the police had sealed it off as a potential crime scene. Yellow tape fluttered in the morning breeze, catching the light like strange rectangular fireflies. Clara turned away from it, scanning the shoreline for whatever Henry had wanted them to find. A glint of sunlight on metal caught her eye, something half buried in the sand near the water's edge. She knelt, brushing away soil and pebbles to reveal a small metal box, the kind used to store ammunition, its surface corroded from years of exposure to the elements. With shaking hands, she pried it open. Inside, protected by a plastic bag, was a cassette tape labeled simply, "For My Daughters," in faded blue ink. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper containing an address in Burlington. Clara tucked both items into her pocket and hurried back to her car. The motel where she'd been staying would have questions about her disheveled appearance, but she needed a shower and clean clothes before facing whatever came next. More importantly, she needed to find a way to play the cassette. 2 hours later, freshly showered and dressed in the last clean outfit from her overnight bag, Clara sat in a pawn shop in downtown Burlington, waiting as the elderly proprietor rummaged through shelves of outdated electronics. He eventually produced a dusty Walkman, checking that the batteries still worked before handing it to her. "Don't see many people wanting to play tapes these days," he commented, his roomy eyes curious behind thick glasses. "It's a family heirloom," Clara replied, the partial truth sticking in her throat. She paid him and left quickly, unwilling to invite further questions. In her car, she inserted the cassette with reverent care, half expecting it to disintegrate after so many years. The machine whirred to life, the sound of blank tape hissing through the small speaker, before a woman's voice emerged, soft, melodic, and heartbreakingly young. "My beautiful girls, Annie and Beth. If you're listening to this, something has happened to your father and me. I pray that's not the case, that this tape will gather dust in Henry's keeping until long after you've grown, and I can tell you everything face to face. But I've seen the way Thomas watches our family, the way he speaks about my daughters as if they're something precious he covets, and I fear the worst." Clara's hands tightened on the steering wheel, tears blurring her vision as her mother's voice continued. "If you've been separated, know that was never our wish. If you've been told lies about us, know that we loved you both equally and completely. And if you're listening to this as adults, having lived lives apart from each other, please understand that love never truly disappears. It only hides itself, waiting to be rediscovered." There was a pause, the sound of muffled crying. Then the woman's voice returned, stronger now. "There are practical matters I should address. The address Henry has given you leads to a safety deposit box at First National Bank in Burlington. The key is taped to the back of this cassette. Inside is everything we could gather about Thomas Reeves and his obsession with mirrors, along with documentation of your true identities. Use it to reclaim your lives and, I hope, to find each other." A man's voice joined in now, deeper, with a slight southern accent. "Annie, Beth, this is your father. Whatever has happened, know that we fought for you until our last breath. The mirror Thomas covets is nothing but glass. Its power is only what he gives it. Remember that you are stronger together than apart. Remember that you are Lewis girls, and Lewis girls never break, they only bend." The tape continued with personal messages, memories shared, love expressed in 1,000 small ways. Clara sat frozen, tears streaming down her face as the voices of parents she couldn't remember poured out their hearts to daughters they feared losing. When the tape finally clicked to a stop, Clara sat in silence for several long minutes, absorbing what she'd heard. Then with newfound determination, she started the car and headed for First National Bank. The safety deposit box contained exactly what her mother had promised: legal documents proving that Annie and Beth Lewis had been born to Evelyn and Thomas Lewis, photographs documenting a happy family life, and a thick folder of newspaper clippings about Thomas Reeves, a man described in one headline as a disgraced psychology professor specializing in memory manipulation. Most disturbing was a journal kept by Evelyn Lewis in the months before her disappearance, detailing increasingly troubling encounters with Reeves, who had moved into the house across the street and inserted himself into their lives with calculated precision. The final entry, dated just 3 days before the family vanished, contained a chilling observation. "Thomas brought a gift for the girls today, an oval mirror in an ornate frame. He insisted it be hung in their bedroom, saying it was specially made for them. When I tried to refuse, something in his eyes changed. For the first time, I felt truly afraid of him. Tom says I'm overreacting, but I'm moving the girls to my sister's tomorrow while he's at work. I pray we're not too late." They had been too late, Clara realized. Thomas Reeves had taken them, used the mirror somehow in his twisted psychological experiments, and when Eleanor, Annie, had been successfully conditioned, he had disposed of Beth, whose stronger will had resisted his methods. And now Samuel, who worked in the same field of psychology, had Eleanor under similar control. The parallels were too striking to be coincidental. Clara gathered the documents and returned to her car, her destination clear. She needed to reach Eleanor before whatever conditioning Samuel had established took permanent hold again. Henry's death in the hidden basement suggested that more than mere psychological manipulation was at stake. There was something darker, more dangerous at play. As she drove toward the address she'd found for the Winters home, Clara glanced in her rearview mirror. For an instant she thought she saw not her own reflection but the face of a young girl, her own face as a child, eyes wide with an unspoken warning. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, but the message lingered. Time was running out. Whatever Samuel was planning, it would happen soon, and Eleanor, Annie, would be at the center of it. The broken mirror in the lake house was the key. Not the physical object, but what it represented. Memories fractured and rearranged. Truth distorted into lies so convincing they replaced reality itself. Clara had escaped that fate through chance or stronger will, but Eleanor had lived within the distorted reflection for 26 years. It was time to break the mirror for good. As mirrors crack and secrets spill, we're reminded that our identities are far more fragile than we imagine. Clara and Eleanor's story shows us that what we think we know about ourselves can be shattered in an instant, leaving us to piece together the fragments of truth. Have you ever wondered what memories lie dormant within you? What connections might exist that you've never suspected? The most frightening prospect isn't that someone might lie to us. It's that we might live our entire lives never knowing who we truly are. The bond between sisters proves stronger than decades of separation, stronger than the psychological manipulation designed to keep them apart. When faced with the most horrifying revelations about her past, Clara chose forgiveness over vengeance, understanding over hatred. What would you do if you discovered your entire life was built on deception? Would you have the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful? Or would you retreat into the comfort of the reality you've always known? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that some connections can never truly be broken. Follow our channel for more tales that explore the depths of human experience, the resilience of the spirit, and the power of forgotten bonds. Leave a comment telling us what resonated most with you. Was it the mystery, the emotional journey, or perhaps the haunting image of a reflection moving independently? Because sometimes the person staring back at us from the mirror knows truths we've yet to discover about ourselves.